Ladies and gentlemen, it is mock draft Monday, and we are going to be discussing if the Falcons are going to be picking high enough to get Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter. We're going to revisit my criticisms of Arthur Smith's opening game script. Maybe I was being a little too harsh. We'll talk about Desmond Ritter's decision making in the Ravens game, as well as the team's aggressiveness on fourth down and other passing situations today on Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, and a.k.a. your humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen here on Christmas evening or the day after Christmas. And we appreciate you guys for checking us out on your preferred podcast platform, whether that be Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. You'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And make sure you check us out on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Atlanta, all the shows, part of that podcast family where we're talking A to Z with Mark Zeno, Locked On Falcons, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs are all available on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Just download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app and you can get us on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So, guys, today is mock draft Monday, our first of the year before 2022 closes out. We don't usually start this until after 2023 season has concluded, but we'll talk about the first couple of picks later in today's episode. But before we get into that, I do want to sort of revisit the conversation yesterday on the Rapid Reaction, where I was very critical of the Falcons opening game script, and rewatching the game on Sunday morning. I think I've come to the conclusion maybe I was being a little too harsh, right? It did seem like on those first couple of series they were trying to do some stuff, they just weren't executing it. They had a bad snap on that opening drive that could have been a handoff to Tyler Algier in that sort of short yardage situations. We don't know. They did try to dial up a screen play to Drake London on the opening play of their second series. It wasn't open, and Ritter sort of scrambled for no gain on that situation. And that gets us to our next topic, which is I'll be curious to sort of look back at the All-22 and re-examine Desmond Ridder's decision-making. He took a sack there was a couple of plays where I feel like, okay, rewatching the game on the broadcast copy, it did feel like there was some questionable decisions there. All right, there was a sack that he took on the second series where he had a chance to check the ball down the Cordero Patterson, where that play was designed to go to Drake London. He was the primary read. He wasn't open on that play, but probably should have went to Patterson on that play. There was a play on the third series that was designed to go to Drake London on 3rd and 10, and Ritter scrambled on that play. He had a bad throw on that 4th and 5 where they went for it to Demir Bird. Then on the next series, I think he probably could have hit Drake London on that inbreaker on 3rd and 7. Instead, he went underneath to Anthony Ferkser that set up the 4th and 2 where he did hit Drake London and then London fumbled. Obviously, you go later into the game where he had the intentional grounding call that was missed by the officials, where his arm was hit, and it shouldn't have been a flag. But he should have gotten rid of the ball earlier. With 20 seconds left in the half, I think he was waiting for Zacchaeus to come open on that play, trying to give him another beat. But you got to throw that ball away, live to play another down, and that was something that he did frequently against the Saints. And he kind of needed to do that in that situation. So, some of those mistakes that he made in that first game against the Saints, they were forgivable. I felt like rewatching the All-22, there were a handful that I think, you would want back. But for the most part, like, I didn't have really a problem with his decision-making. And I'll be curious when I watch the All-22 from this Ravens game, whether or not I'll come to a similar conclusion. Right. And so, part of it is I don't want to overreact to some poor decisions by Desmond Ridder, because I think one of the flaws that has been revealed, since the bye week, especially with Ritter at the helm, is this is basically the Drake London show on offense. That basically, if Drake London isn't getting open, this passing game is dead in the water, and some of that is owed to Desmond Ritter, some of that's owed to the play calling, some of that's owed to the lack of weapons elsewhere, and unfortunately we've seen Olamide Zaccheaus sidelined within this offense, these last couple of weeks with Ritter at the helm. And that's something that, I talked with Jarvis Davis on Friday's episode, wanting to see, Zaccheaus play better, or be more involved in the passing game. And he was a little bit more involved this week than he was in the Saints game. So hopefully I can continue to build moving forward. So looking at all of that, I still am leaning towards the belief. I would still put money on the idea that Desmond Ridder will be the Falcons' opening day starter in 2023. But obviously that's not a slam dunk. We'll have to sort of see what these next two games show us in that regard. And that will feed us into the conversation when we get to mock draft Monday later in the episode, whether or not, the Falcons will explore taking a quarterback at the top of the draft. But before we get to that, I do want to revisit kind of the fourth down decision-making that they made, looking at some analytics websites, looking at their fourth down calculator to really break down those decisions. And, one of the other things I wanted to look at is, are they being a little bit more aggressive throwing in certain situations with Desmond Ridder at the helm than they were with Marcus Mariota? We'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's episode. But first, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Prize Picks, who have a fun new way to play daily fantasy. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less in their Prize Picks projection, you can look at projections for Drake London and Desmond Ridder. I put in my projection. I had Ritter having less yards than his projection did, and that cost me. But the great thing about Prize Picks, you can win up to 10 times your money on your injury. It takes less than 60 seconds. It's not you versus other people. It's just you versus projections. So, they offer projections not only in the NFL, but NBA, NHL, PGA, college football, so much more, esports. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the U.S. and Canada. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, they will give you $100 to play with. Don't forget to use that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So I went to the website runningbacksdon'tmatter.com. It's rbsdm.com. And they have a fourth down calculator because I wanted to revisit the Falcons' fourth down tries where they went for it. And they have a disclaimer on their website that basically says these are estimates, please use accordingly. So these aren't necessarily meant to be the end all definitive take on this, but it's just one way where you can calculate that. Because I know Arthur Smith, I criticized Arthur Smith a lot on yesterday's Rapper Reaction with the opening game script. I didn't have criticism for him for his decision to go for it from the goal line on that fourth down and 1. And I probably know some people differed on that. And so I wanted to revisit that. And, they use this fourth down calculator, running backs don't matter, is based off of win probability. And win probability is, taking all these factors like down distance, time, score, field position, and looking at like decades worth of games to basically calculate what is the percentage of the team is won in these situations in order to, justify, okay, these are where the odds are in your favor, all that sort of stuff. So you go to the first fourth down try that the Falcons tried at the end of the first quarter. It was a 4th and 5. Going for it, they would have increased their win probability by 1.3%. And this, of the 4 times that the Falcons did go for it on fourth down, this is probably the one that you could probably pick the most holes in it. They only had about a 39% chance of converting on a 4th and 5, given that down and distance. And, I understand why they went for it. They were kind of looking for a spark at that point. You're kind of in that no man's land where you can't really kick a field goal, and kicking a punt, you're more likely to get a touchback than necessarily get that coffin corner. So you're not really helping yourself. And so, it's 3-0. But if you're going to basically criticize Arthur Smith's decision to go for it, this is probably the one that at least the calculator would say. And I would say, given the 4th and 5 situation, you may, you're maybe just further enough that you can try that punt in that situation. So this was probably the one that you would probably quibble with the most. The next fourth down came on the next series. It was 4th and 2. It was at Baltimore's 46-yard line, so similar field position. And going for it would have increased their win probability by 2.3%. And since it's 4th and 2, your chances of converting are about 52%. So the odds are in your favor that you convert in that situation. Then you had the 4th and 1 at the opening drive on the third quarter at the 50. Similarly, increase of 2.1% win probability, 65% chance of converting on a 4th and 1 situation. Then you had the 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter at the goal line, at the 1 yard line. And this one, you're increasing your win probability by 5.7%. And so, I didn't see too many people criticizing Arthur Smith's decision to go for it on the earlier 4th downs. And the reason why I bring those up is because basically, you're increasing your win probability to like 1 to 2% by going for it in those situations. In that 4th and goal, that from the 1 yard line is where people were like, oh, they should have taken the points. It's like, no, like, there's a difference between 1 and 2% increase and like 6% increase, right? If you kick the field goal, your win probability in that situation is only 5%. If you convert, it goes from, it goes up to 16%, right? If you get stopped, if you go for it and get stopped, your win probability is only 3%. So the field goal is not really increasing your chances of winning the football game. So like the only chance you really have of winning the game, as I tried to explain on yesterday's episode, is by going for it and getting the touchdown. If not, then, you're not really helping yourselves out in a major way. So I also, just for fun, looked at the 4th and 4 on the next drive where they kicked the field goal from the 18, and going forward in that situation would have increased their win probability 0.5%. So it'll be interesting to go back and this offseason and look at all the times the Falcons went forward on 4th down this season, because you'll probably conclude that there's a certain point in the field, and it seemed like in this game it's somewhere around between the 50 and the 40 in the opposing territory, where the Falcons are more inclined to go for it on 4th down. So it'll be interesting. We'll look back at that maybe in the offseason. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was the onside kick decision, this decision not to kick the onside. I had a problem with this at the time. I don't think I talked about this on the Rapid Reaction. And it was weird to me because they put Younghoe Koo out there on the field, and I'm like, okay, they're going to kick the onside. They got Younghoe Koo because Bradley Pinion's the normal kickoff guy, and he was all set up for it, and the ball fell off the tee, and then he went back to set up the tee, and they ran out Bradley Pinion out there, and I'm just like, okay, like, why did was it the wind or something like that? You didn't think it didn't make any sense to me, because like I understand why a team doesn't kick the onside there, because you basically don't want to let the game come down to that play, because that's essentially what the onside is doing, right? Like if you recover it, you have a chance to win. If you don't, the game's over. But to me, kicking it away in that situation, you're pretty much conceding the game at that point. I know technically you have a chance to get a 3 and out, but realistically, like the Falcons hadn't stopped the Ravens run game all game long. So the idea that they were going to basically put the clamps on him, and then they were going to force a punt in a 3 and out, and then you would have to basically have like a minute to go 75 yards. I think kick the onside, you got 2 minutes. And if you recover it, you got 2 minutes to go 55 yards to potentially, win the game. But instead, you're like delaying that decision. So I don't know. Like to me, I would be aggressive in that situation. It was just weird to me that the Falcons looked like they were ready to kick the onside with Younghoe Koo, and then decided randomly to pull him off the field and put Bradley Pinion. And then on top of that, Pinion kicks it short. And again, I don't know if that's the wind again, but like, that didn't help. Like if he kicked the touchback there, and Ravens take over with 2:03, they run a play. Potentially, again, theoretically, you're saving yourself like 3 seconds, but who knows? But like, I don't know. It didn't help matters is basically. So like I've softened my stance on the early game criticism of Arthur Smith, but I will not soften my stance on that decision. I need to get more information on that. So I'll look forward to Marquise Williams's press conference on Thursday this week to see what insight he shares on that situation, if he has any. But the other thing that I noticed at runningbacksdon'tmatter.com is they have a passing over expected model based off of teams' frequency to throw the ball in certain situations. And I wanted to look at that because it seemed to me rewatching the game, it's like, yeah, they were consistently throwing the ball a lot more on like 2nd and long situations than they had been previously in the season. And I wanted to kind of double check that. And, there is something to that. They have a model where they sort of break it down by down and distance on several downs, but I was mostly focused on the 2nd down situations where they kind of break it down on 2nd and short, which is 2nd and 1 and 2 in their model, 2nd and medium, 2nd and 3 through 7, and then you have 2nd and long, which is 2nd and 8 or more or longer. and they sort of track it based off of, what each team's pass frequency in those situations versus the NFL average or NFL norms are. And I don't really care what the NFL norms are at this situation. There wasn't a lot of difference. And I looked at these 2 games under Ritter versus the last 3 games of the Mariota, mostly because that's the time when we're talking about evolving the offense. And I did notice that they were more frequently, second and short and second and long, not really a massive change in their frequency of throwing the ball in those situations, but second and medium seems significant. Now you look at running backs don't matter model, they don't have an exact figure on it because they're measuring it based off of the NFL norms, but it looks like their model shows that the Falcons on second and medium under the Ritter, these last 2 games, are throwing it close to 67% of the time. And the last 3 starts of Mariota, it was around 45% of the time. Now I went to the box score data over at stathead.com to look it up. And according to them, the second and medium situations, the Falcons throw the ball 55% of the time the last 2 games under Ritter, and the last 3 games of the Mariota was about 46% of the time. And then you look at the first 10 games under Mariota for the second comparison, it was about 43% of the time. So, their numbers are a little off. I don't know why that is, again. But it does seem like the conclusion is that the Falcons are throwing it more. It's just the disparity is not as large as running backs don't matter seems to make it seem like. It's not 67 versus 45, it's 55 versus 45. So that is notable to me because Arthur Smith did say he wasn't going to change the offense now that Ritter's running it. He's going to call it the same way. So this is part of that quote unquote evolution that we've been talking about for the last 2-3 months of this team involving. So it does seem like he is calling a more aggressive game plan than he was under Mariota. And that may be contributing to some of the reasons why we haven't seen necessarily Ritter hit the ground running, because his learning curve, is higher than what Mariota's was, at the beginning of the season. So we'll see if Ritter can start living up to that or not these last 2 games, but we'll see sort of, what the Falcons can do come April. Because we'll wrap up today's episode by getting to that mock draft Monday that I know you guys want and want to hear my thoughts on how those early picks go. So we'll go through the first couple of picks of how I sort of see the NFL draft coming and who may be on the board for the Falcons to look at. So we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But, let's talk a little bit more about something much more serious than, mock drafts. And, you may find yourself, this holiday season, hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. And you may wind up drinking a few too many. And as the evening comes and you're ready to head out, you're thinking about calling for a ride, but you say, look, I live nearby. I can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds that I get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that can happen, right? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, or you kill somebody. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly, but however, that doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again, play it safe, and plan ahead and get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. So, guys, let's wrap up today's episode talking a little bit of Mock Draft Monday. Before we get to it, though, I do have to give this disclaimer. It is December, right? And I know this is a real hard concept for a lot of you guys to understand, but mock drafts are pretty pointless until the month of March, until we get to free agency and teams start actually, checking some of these boxes and filling needs. All these mock drafts, you should take all this stuff with a grain of salt. And I'll use a clear example from last year. Like this time last year, if we had done a mock draft Monday or anybody had done a mock draft Monday, Trayvon Walker probably would have been barely considered in the first round, let alone with the number 1 overall pick. So a lot can happen between now and in April. And I wanted to make that clear. Like, these are my opinions now, but I have no idea what I'm talking about. So you should take all of this. I'm begging you, take all of this with a grain of salt, but I know you're not going to, so let's talk about it. So obviously we'll go through the first couple of picks and sort of where my head is at in terms of what I'm expecting with these first couple of picks. But again, a lot will change over the next 3 to 4 months. Houston, of course, has the number 1 pick. They're almost certainly going to draft the quarterback, whoever they think is QB1. And, all the rumors and NFL buzz seems to think that the NFL loves Will Levis and is lukewarm on the rest of this quarterback class, including Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson. I think they're going to take Will Levis, even if a lot of people don't think Will Levis is the best quarterback in this draft class, I'm sure a lot of people will think Will Levis is the fourth best quarterback in this draft class. We'll sort of see. You're going to hear Josh Allen comparisons. You're going to hear Matt Stafford comparisons. You're probably going to hear some Drew Lock comparisons, particularly for the people that are not as high on Will Levis as others are. So we'll see how that wears. Let's be frank. Let's let's talk about the giant elephant in the room. I do think the fact that Will Levis has different color skin than the other top quarterbacks in this draft class is going to help him. And I don't think it's necessarily, I think it would be too reductive and too basic for me to say it's because the NFL is racist. I don't think the NFL is racist, but I do think the NFL is prejudiced. I think there's inherent biases that when you have, certain people in positions of powers that are decision makers, and that leads to those people, seeing other people in positions of leadership and having some of those inherent biases when they choose. You have a white owner, he's going to pick a white coach or white GM. You have a white coach and white GM, they're looking at leadership qualities in the quarterback. They're going to default to white people. That doesn't mean they're racist. It's just that's kind of the inherent biases that they have. And so it's a lot easier for NFL decision makers to see, Will Levis's, quote unquote intangibles and high qualities than it is with some of these other quarterbacks. I think I think we'll just have to see if that lives up to these expectations or not. But I think Will Levis is probably going to be the number one pick. So be prepared for that. So I would love to be wrong on that, but I just say get ready for it. Moving on to the Bears number 2 pick, obviously they're probably not going to take a quarterback, and they're probably going to be looking to trade back, and so they're in prime trade back territory. So whoever wants to go up and get one of these other quarterbacks, the non-Will Levis quarterback, will be in prime position to trade it all for to the Bears. But if they stay put there, they're probably going to be picking between Will Anderson and Jalen Carter. I would assume they're going to lean Anderson just because they've gotten rid of guys like Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn in the last year. And traditionally edge rushers are valued more than interior defensive linemen, but we'll see if Jalen Carter, can sort of surpass him in this postseason pre-draft process. Now, before we move on, I got to give full disclosure. I am recording this Sunday morning before the Denver Rams game, as well as the Arizona Tampa Bay game, and not to mention the Colts are playing Monday night. So there's several teams that are going to come up in this mock draft that may not be picking where they are picking. Obviously, the winner of the Rams Broncos game, with those two teams holding the 3rd and 4th pick, or at least holding, other teams hold the rights to those picks because they traded them away. Obviously, assuming that's not a tie, one of those teams is going to be a 5-win team, and based off of strength of schedule, it has a harder strength of schedule than the Falcons, and so we'll be picking after the Falcons. So the Falcons are currently slotted in at 7, but by the end of today could be picking as high as 5. And by the end of Monday, depending on if the Colts win, right? If the Bucs lose to the Cardinals, the winner of that Rams game, the Falcons can go from 7 to 4, by Tuesday. So keep that in mind. So that'll be part of the conversation, but let's just assume that the draft order does not change, which we know is not technically going to happen unless the Rams and Broncos tie. But Seattle has the Denver pick at number 3. And I think right now they're kind of the break point in this draft where we don't really know what Seattle's going to do. Could they take a quarterback? Absolutely. But Geno's played well, but the last couple of weeks has not gone well. They're 1-5 in their last 6 games, and whatever momentum Geno seemed to have to potentially be the starting quarterback for them next year, he's starting to lose that. So we'll see. If Bryce Young is there, he would make sense. I think he's the best quarterback in this draft class based off what I've seen. But you wonder if Seattle will be as interested in Bryce Young because of the, similarities between him and Russell Wilson from a physical dimension. Does that make them more inclined to overlook those issues with Bryce Young, or does it make them, wanting to move in a different direction? Who knows at this point in time? So they are also a trade back candidate. Especially if they're willing to roll with Geno, and maybe they trade back looking to get a number 1 pick in next year's draft because of the conversation we had with Mark Schofield, where, they're like, oh, next year's draft class, let's get Caleb Williams. Let's set ourselves up to get a quarterback at the top of next year's draft and give Geno another go. Who knows? But they certainly could use a player like Jalen Carter if he's there. They also have the 13th overall pick currently, and you would imagine, given the depth of this edge class compared to the interior D line, a great combination. If they were comfortable with rolling with Geno, you get Jalen Carter here at number 3, and then you get whoever the best edge rusher is at 13, and boom, you've transformed your defensive line all of a sudden with 2 first-round talents to enhance that pass rush. The 4th overall pick is the Rams pick. That's going to the Lions due to the Stafford trade. Again, Goff has played well, but you would imagine the Lions have kind of set themselves up to get a quarterback, right? And so this is their prime opportunity, especially if a player like Bryce Young is there. I would imagine they would pull the trigger on that. Whoever their top quarterback is, they'll pull the trigger on that with that 4th overall pick. But at the same time, I don't think they would be upset to settle for a Jalen Carter type of player to tag team him with Aiden Hutchinson at this spot. So we'll see what they do. So these 2 picks are going to be interesting. Does Seattle or in Detroit go for a quarterback here? And a lot of that's going to depend on what they think of this quarterback class, which is going to be the conversation. This is not a 2021 draft class where it's like, oh, they're definitely going to take a quarterback because of the talent. Like, this is, again, it's not the same. It's a better quarterback class than last year's, but like, it's similar to last year's. It's kind of a what's your flavor type of quarterback. And just because you like one quarterback does not mean that you're automatically like the other 3 in this year's draft class, which is much more similar to last year's draft class and the previous year's draft class, where, you obviously you still had, a different flavor of quarterback, but generally speaking, it's like, yeah, I don't need to have to squint to see it with some of these guys. The number 5 pick is the Cardinals, which again, if they beat the Bucs, that's going to change. But the Falcons would presumably be picking here as well. They're obviously not going to take a quarterback. You assume they'll take it to pass rush. Again, if Jalen Carter's there, they'll obviously it's a no-brainer at this point in time. But assuming Carter's gone by this point, they're going to probably be in a position to take the 3rd best non-quarterback in this draft class, which I think is probably going to be one of the 2 Clemson pass rushers, Brian Bresee or Miles Murphy. Murphy is a guy that I compare to Cam Jordan. He's like a 270-pound, base defensive end, power rusher, has good hands, all these various things, very reminiscent to me of not Cam Jordan when he was coming out of Cal 12 years ago, but Cam Jordan, of today. Not the washed version. Or the defensive player of the year candidate for the last 4 years, not the washed Cam Jordan. Yes, I'm gonna throw shade at Cam Jordan constantly as much as I can until he shows up on my doorstep and beats me up, and then we'll see. Bresee is an interesting player because he was like the number 1 overall prospect in his draft in his recruiting class back in 2020. Similar to like Thibodeau and Clowney and all these other guys. But he's missed a lot of time with injuries, right? He tore his ACL last year, missed most of last year, and then he missed several games this year with a kidney infection. And like that's led to his 2022 film being up and down, like certain games. Like if you watch his highlight clips, like you're gonna be like, this guy's incredible. But then if you just like sit down and watch the games, you're like, is he like the 3rd best guy on Clemson's defensive line? Like that's some of the things that you see in some of these games. But he's a player that has versatility. He can play defensive end in a 3-4. He can play D tackle in a 4-3. They move him around a couple of times, so he can rush from a number of different techniques. So he's a versatile player, unlike a Murphy, who's probably more sort of specific to a certain type of scheme. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So he'll be interesting. I think Arizona certainly would love to have a Bresee type because, JJ Watt and Zach Allen, I think, are both free agents after this year. And it doesn't seem likely that they're going to keep both of those guys, like Watt, especially, Allen being the younger of the 2, I would assume would be more likely that they try to resign, but we'll see how that goes. So, Bresee would slot in very favorably to fill the JJ Watt size shoes in that defensive line moving forward. So number 6 pick, Colts. You got to assume the Colts are going to go either quarterback if the guy they like is there. That's going to be their number 1 need, or offensive tackle if that's not the case, right? And so I would project Stroud here, assuming that Young and Levis are both gone at this point in time. It makes sense, get a competent sort of, efficient pocket quarterback, all those things that Stroud is or is not. They could also trade up for a quarterback potentially if they're worried of settling for whoever's going to be there. In terms of offensive tackle, I know Peter Skoronski gets a lot of the hype. I think the arm length, the sub 33-inch arms, as reported to have, is going to prevent him from being too high of a draft pick. It's kind of similar to the Tyler Linderbaum stuff, where it's just like, when last year people were projecting Linderbaum to be a top 10 pick, I was just like, the NFL does not does not value his type of center like that. And so he wound up falling to wherever he went in the middle of the first round. And so I kind of feel like Skoronski's going to be a similar player. He's going to get picked somewhere in the middle latter portion of round one. And so that probably, I would guess, Paris Johnson is going to be OT1 in his draft class, but I don't know if he's going to be as well liked to go this high in the draft. Like I feel like that 10 to 15 range is probably more likely for him, but we'll see. Again, it's December, who knows at this point in time. So I think they'll probably go quarterback here, but if not, then someone like a Paris Johnson, if they like him that much, they might take him this high. So that leaves the Falcons here at 7 currently as I'm recording this, but again, probably by the end of today, they'll probably be 6 or 5, and possibly tomorrow, maybe as high as 4, although I doubt it. But obviously quarterback's going to be part of the conversation. And based off of this current projection, if Levis is gone, Young is gone, and Stroud is gone, that leaves basically Anthony Richardson as the 4th guy. And going back to the conversation I had with Mark Schofield earlier this week, I don't think there's a problem because personally, again, it's early in the process. But for me, I kind of go Young here. There's a gap, and then I would probably bet on Richardson as QB2 over Levis and Stroud personally. Now, again, it's kind of pick your flavor, but Richardson's, to me, the big issue with Richardson is accuracy. His accuracy is terrible, frankly. Like think of the worst version of Cam Newton. Like that's kind of where he is. But I do feel like some of that stuff may be mechanical issues. And like that to me is the interesting thing about Cam Newton is like, I don't think Carolina really tried to fix Cam's mechanics because like they were like, whatever. And so like, I'll be curious whether it's the Falcons or somebody else, if another team like basically it's like, okay, we're going to devote time and energy to trying to fix Richardson mechanically so that his accuracy is going to improve. He'll still probably not be, a 68% completion quarterback. You'll still have to live with him being basically like a 58% quarterback or something like that, which is very low in today's NFL modern, but the playmaking ability, can, similar to Cam, can kind of balance that out in terms of what he can peak. And I think the thing you like about Richardson is he kind of checks all the other boxes outside of the accuracy one. And depending on how you feel about that, determines whether you think, that's a non-starter with him or whatever. Again, pick your flavor. But like, I think he checks some of these other boxes, like, decision-making, pocket poise, more so than some of these other quarterbacks in this draft class, like Stroud and Levis and even Young in certain areas. So he's an intriguing player, but we'll see how that goes. But if the Falcons don't go quarterback here, then you're talking about probably one of the Clemson guys, right? Whoever's left between Brissy and Murphy. And going back to the 3-4 versus 4-3 conversation, like again, Murphy, I think if you draft him, you're looking more at 4-3 base defense. And the Falcons run a hybrid scheme, but you're probably leaning a lot more towards 4-3 than they currently are leaning, which is, more towards the 3-4 end of the spectrum. But if you draft Brissy, you can stick with the 3-4 stuff. So it'll be interesting. I feel like the Falcons right now are in good position to get a really good player at the top of this draft. Obviously, so much, whether these are like the top 7 guys, like they seem to be, from my perspective, like the 7 or 8 guys that, are definitely in the mix to be top 10 picks that I would bet. Other players, I'm contractually obligated to mention Bijan Robinson. Broderick Jones, I know some of you guys, Georgia fans, are wondering sort of, why not him over Paris Johnson. I'm a big fan of Broderick Jones. Like, to me, he's kind of like the offensive version of Trayvon Walker from last year, where it's like he's raw, but he's like a freakish athlete. And like, if the Falcons are going to bet on an offensive lineman with Dwayne Ledford here, I'd be much more willing to bet on Broderick Jones than I am Paris Johnson. And just basically like Ledford will clean up the technical stuff that, Jones definitely needs to have clean up, but you don't find athletes like this. Like he's like in my opinion, again, maybe this is talking out of turn, but like, he's like a Trent Williams level athlete. So like that to me is where his potential could be if you can develop it, but that may not be, it may take the better part of like 3 or 4 years before he reaches that. So that's something you have to factor in. The other position I could see the Falcons pulling trigger on this early in the draft is cornerback. This is usually the range where the top corners typically go. You know, the consensus seems to be Oregon's Christian Gonzalez is the top corner in this draft class, given, you know, the height, weight, speed. We talked about this last year, that, you know, corners get drafted based off of, you know, like measurements more so than necessarily who's the best guy on film. It's about upside. It's, you know, there's a reason why AJ Terrell was drafted after CJ Henderson and Jeff Okudah, and it's not to say that AJ Terrell didn't have, you know, impressive measurables. That's another conversation, but I've watched some of these corners. I'm not in love with these guys quite yet. You know, like, I don't think there's a Sauce Gardner in this draft class. I don't think there's a Derek Stingley in this draft class. I don't even know if any of these guys are better than Trent McDuffie. They're, from a measurable standpoint, much better than Trent McDuffie, who went 21 overall last year to the Chiefs. But I don't know if as a football players they're better. So I'm iffy on the corner conversation, at least at this point in the draft, but we'll see. Again, it's December. We'll find out, guys. So that's where we're going to leave this mock draft Monday, just as sort of just one very, very early possibility that you should take with a grain of salt. But these are going to be some of the conversations, at least based off of all the draft content I've listened. I'm no expert. I basically defer to other people's opinions through the fall. And then we're now getting into the point of the calendar year where I will start to form my own opinions on these players, right? I am watching these guys and I'm giving you my perspective on it, but I'm also paying a lot more attention to what other people are saying about it, because ultimately, whether or not the team drafts these guys doesn't matter based off my opinion, right? You know, and how the Falcons feel about a player is not going to be based off of how I feel about that player. So these are part of the conversations that we need to have. So that is going to do it for us, guys. I hope you enjoy that mock draft Monday as a late Christmas present, because you're probably watching this after Christmas, but an early gift, because we're not going to get back to probably mock draft Mondays until probably after the Super Bowl in February. So, you know, let this simmer in your pot, stir it up, all that sort of stuff. So, guys, that's going to do it for us. Tomorrow will be a Q&A mailbag episode. So if you have questions that you want to send in and submit, you can do so via Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, or you can hit me up in the Locked On Falcons Discord, the link in the description below. Guys, I really appreciate it. We'll watch the All-22 later this week as well. I hope you check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Atlanta as your second listens, in addition to making Locked On Falcons your first listen, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.